Mark 15. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5.
This is RFD Today, a daily look at the key topics impacting rural Illinois. If you live in Illinois, we examine the issues impacting you, your income, and your community. Here's your host for today's program, Bill Oshanke.
Hey, good Tuesday to you, Illinois. Thanks for joining us for this adventure in broadcasting on the 7th of May. And yesterday's report from Ag Statistics, with only 10% of the state's corn crop planted. Last week was 9, this week was 10. Indiana last week was 2, this week was 3. Statewide average precipitation was more than 3 inches. So what, with all of that moisture in the soil, what does that mean? I mean, is there any prospect for much more planting this week, considering there's still rain in the forecast today, Wednesday, Thursday? We'll hear later from DTN Ag meteorologist Bryce Anderson. Ellen Ferguson will join us from D.C. from Congressional Quarterly. We'll talk trade. We'll talk disaster assistance. We'll talk a couple of other things as well. And Jim Mindert at Purdue University, the Purdue CME Group Ag Barometer, had a plummet in its latest report. We'll get some of the details about that from Jim later in the program. That's all to come. First, though, we'll get an agronomy update with our own Rita Frazier.
Pioneer Field agronomist Tony Zaruzin joins us. Tony is in the Effingham, or works out of the Effingham area because, Tony, that's where your home farm is.
Yeah, born and raised. I've been with Pioneer for about 5 years now.
You serve customers in southeastern Illinois, and you also farm with your dad and brother, you mentioned, and you guys have not had the chance to get out at all in the field.
No, no one in the area really has. There's a little bit of an anhydrous out, some burn down that was applied a week or two ago, but for the most part, a lot of these acres have not been touched.
So what are your conversations like this first week of May?
A lot of conversations on late maturity hybrids. When should I start switching? Is it too late to plant a 116, 117-day hybrid? And the biggest concern is that we don't want to start giving up yield in terms of dry down. So we've got a long time before we need to start worrying about that. Kind of the tipping point here in Southern Illinois would be that last couple days of May or even into the first couple days of June before you start moving into much earlier maturity. What we give up on the back end with yield is far more than what we would gain on the dry down. So that's been a big concern with growers and trying to walk through them, the process and what we'd be giving up. And it's a pretty emotional decision. I understand that. It's not easy to sit out there and let your corn dry. But what we'd be giving up in the long run is definitely worse than what we're getting in terms of dry down.
So back to, April conversations for the most part, Tony, we were even at that point talking about, what would you do first? So some thought maybe they would get in early this year enough to go with beans first. Where are you guys in that area of the state thinking? And given the calendar date, is that sort of out the window, or do they go with soybean first and then allow the anhydrous to its window?
Great question. Right now, it's whatever acre works. That's the one you go on. Ideally, anhydrous needs about 5 to 7 days of rest before you can go and plant behind it to try and avoid anhydrous burn. Mother Nature hasn't given us that window, so it's going to be compressed. I understand that. If you absolutely have to plant corn right now, I would suggest getting that anhydrous in as deep as possible to try and avoid any anhydrous burn to the root system.
Tony Zaruzin, Pioneer Field agronomist. We'll continue a conversation with Tony later this week. Maybe we'll dive into weed and insect management going through this tough spring.
Welcome back. Joining us on the phone, we have our regular conversation, which we always appreciate, and it is with Ellen Ferguson, who writes Ag Issues in D.C. for Congressional Quarterly. Ellen, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Hey, we're doing all right. Well, it's, we get to watch the theater, if you will, to see how this all develops. And we talked about, I think we talked exclusively about trade last time, and I didn't want to talk about trade this time, but then on Sunday, the president started tweeting about China and more tariffs if things don't get done by Friday, and just wonder amongst peers and colleagues, maybe not on Sunday, but eventually what was the reaction when you were starting to talk to folks about the latest installment in this drama?
Well, I think it was split. I mean, there was concern, especially among the business groups, that if indeed Friday is the deadline and the day when the rate of the tariffs will rise from 10% to 25%, but that's just not enough time for them to plan and to absorb it. I think probably administration would say to them is you've been kind of on notice for several months that this was a possibility. On the other hand, you had people cheering the president on taking a tough stand. From of all people, Senator Charles Schumer of New York, who is the minority leader, the Democrats in the Senate, who is a longtime China hawk, telling the president, keep the pressure on. So I think it has been viewed as potentially a way to increase pressure on the Chinese, and the negotiation. We're kind of in the final stages. Whether that works, I guess we'll find out. Right now, the talks were supposed to resume on Wednesday. Now it looks as though it will be Thursday, and it's not clear whether there's going to be some kind of final deal on Friday or what happens. So I think the question now is what next?
Yeah, it's hard to walk that sort of thing back when you put it out there like that. So it does seem a rather limited window to get things done. Trade Representative Lighthizer suggested, there were still plenty of pieces to putting this sort of thing together. So if it's going to be out there, then I guess Friday it'll be out there.
Well, you can always say when you're negotiating that things have come back to we're on the right path now, and so we have made progress, and there'll be another round of talks. I would think if the administration says that, then they will say probably that we will look to have a final deal within X number of rounds of talk. That the negotiations can't go on forever is what I would expect them to say. But again, it also depends on what your definition of a deal is. Maybe on Friday they release some sort of broad outline of things that they have tentatively agreed to, an agreement in principle. There are multiple ways that this can be worked, so we'll just have to see.
So when college football, basketball teams are looking for the new high-profile coach, sometimes people go to the local airport and just see, who's flying in and where's that plane going and all that sort of thing. Is there that sort of thing of just, okay, who's actually coming from China and how many? There's supposed to be like 100 people and some big names within that. Does that sort of thing go on?
Well, it's still the vice premier who is coming, and he has been involved from the very beginning. So there's continuity. The Chinese at this point have not pulled anybody out. So I think maybe they're coming to see exactly how far the administration is going to push. I mean, by and large, Congress is a bystander to all of this. Whatever it is that the administration, if there is a final agreement, it's not going to Congress. So they can weigh in, but they really, I don't think, have any ultimate influence on this. This is a president-to-president, country-to-country, trade rep to trade rep sort of arrangement going on. So we'll just see what they come up with. I know that lawmakers will probably have some questions. There are several Republican senators who are supposed to be going to the White House today, not on trade, but on immigration. But I don't quite see how you would, if you have questions about what's happening with China, that you don't kind of, at least informally, raise those questions. So I think there'll be an effort to try and get a few more details and try and figure out what it is that the administration believes the Chinese tried to walk away from. How close are they actually to finishing a deal, and what needs to be done in order for some agreement to be reached. So, again, a lot of questions, a very short time span to answer them if indeed the administration is firm on something by Friday, maybe Saturday.
Yeah.
We'll see.
That helps answer my next question, because I was going to say, because USMCA still languishes. It's been ratified, or it's been signed by all three nations, but nothing official has been done. Well, it just languishes in Congress, at least here in the U.S. But China won't have to have that same kind of a China deal won't have to have that same kind of approval then. So that seems like a positive.
Well, I as a reporter, I kind of think the more oversight you have, the better off you are.
Yeah.
I can put together something and think it's the most wonderful thing in the world, but a third set of eyes might help me on that.
Mm-hmm.
But the administration has styled this as, they use Section 301 tariffs to push the Chinese to come to talks, and so they're saying that any agreement that they reach will just be a resolution of an executive action using those tariffs. So there's no need for Congress to get involved. And I think Congress really is not looking to get involved because I think there's bipartisan agreement that the United States needs to challenge China on a number of fronts, but it is a tricky and potentially politically dangerous sort of endeavor to take on, that I think that many members of Congress are only too happy to have the White House and the President do it. So we'll see what comes of it.
Yeah. Hang on just a second. We have a break coming up here. Ellen Ferguson writes for Congressional Quarterly and joins us monthly on RFD Today.
Be it through headlines, microphones, or tweets, Mike Orso connects rural routes for you. Mike has been covering farm and food issues for more than 3 decades. Whether it's print, video, radio, or feeding your online appetite, Mike keeps you in the loop. Here's a bit about his rural roots.
I keep our communities, state, and country in mind with everything I do. My job allows me to work toward this mission with farmers and other rural Illinoisans.
Be it routes or roots, RFD Radio, FarmWeekNow.com, and Farm Week keep you connected.
As you prepare for planting season, remember your neighbors. Whether you're an applicator, grower, or beekeeper, use FieldWatch to register your farm and monitor for sensitive sites around you. FieldWatch is a free, easy-to-use online mapping tool. Consulting FieldWatch is now a requirement for the over-the-top use dicamba products. Communicating with your neighbors will help you protect your farm and the environment. Don't wait. Go online to fieldwatch.com. Growing agriculture. We grow best together.
You're going to need me. You're going to need us.
All of us.
You're going to need our technical skills,
our math, our engineering skills.
You're going to need our help with your water, your air, your food.
You're going to need our organizational skills, our problem-solving skills.
You're going to need our determination, our honesty, our compassion.
You're going to need the next generation of leaders to face the challenges the future will bring.
And we promise we'll be there when you need us.
Today, 4-H is growing the next generation of leaders. Support us at 4h.org.
This is the story of Mrs. Clark, who has lived on this very block most of her 80 years, often seen walking to town or serving brownies to the neighborhood kids, and everyone loves her. 2 years ago, a certain family member moved in to look after Mrs. Clark, and that's when everything changed. Mrs. Clark became the victim of elder abuse.
Elder abuse is often closer to home than you think or want to believe. McGruff, the crime dog here. The National Crime Prevention Council wants you to know the signs of elder abuse. Bruises, isolation, reduced activities, poor hygiene, depression, and financial problems. Protect yourself and speak out if you recognize signs of abuse in others.
Elder abuse is a crime that affects over 2 million senior citizens every year. Even more astounding, it's most commonly committed by a family member or someone they trusted. If you suspect abuse, contact your local law enforcement agency. To learn more, go to ncpc.org/seniors. That's ncpc.org/seniors. A message from the National Crime Prevention Council and the U.S. Department of Justice.
Joining us on the phone today, Ellen Ferguson, writing for Congressional Quarterly. We talk to trade a lot when we visit on the phone. Surely there are other things to discuss, especially from ag, or at least from a Midwest perspective. What's one thing, either in the House or Senate or both, that is earning attention?
Well, gradually earning attention. There's been a lot of back and forth and finger-pointing over the last few weeks about the impasse over disaster assistance, which would include the Midwest, since it's been added because of the flooding. Right now, the Senate is trying to work between Democrats and Republicans to try and come up with some sort of compromise disaster package for the Senate. The goal is to try and have some kind of package by the end of this week. It doesn't necessarily mean that there would be action on it by this week, but just that they would have a working document. The House is going to be working on voting on its version of disaster assistance. That's going to be about $17 billion. They're voting on that, scheduled to vote on that this week. So I think the short-term goal will be to try and get the Senate compromise bill or package done and voted on, and then eventually some sort of negotiations between the House and the Senate to do a final disaster package. I would think that they might be trying to aim for having something done before Memorial Day recess. I don't know exactly if that's going to work out for them, but I think the goal is to try and wrap this up by early June, if at all possible.
Well, you would think May and June in an odd-numbered year, this would be the time to really get some things done, wouldn't it?
It is. May and June are really heavy months for them being in, and so there's time to work on things. They have a list of things they'd like to get done. The question is whether they will get done. Appropriations is another thing that they're working on. The House Appropriations Committee has had several subcommittee markups, and I think now they're coming to this week to have full committee review of those bills. So the House is starting to move on appropriations bill. I don't know when the agricultural appropriations bill is going to be marked up, but marked up, I mean the subcommittee works on it, approves a draft bill, and then the draft bill goes to the full appropriations committee where it may or may not be amended, and so that then perhaps some of these bills may come to the floor for a vote. But essentially, the House is trying to get its appropriations bills in order, although most people expect that, again, it won't be until the fall or maybe December before we actually see a final spending package for fiscal 2020. I
was going to ask you about that. I mean, if it takes so long just to put a disaster relief package together, what does that mean for funding the entire government? It doesn't seem like a very good sign necessarily.
Well, it sort of depends. I mean, the question is, in the appropriations process, how insistent is the president going to be on additional money for the border and changes to how the United States deals with asylum seekers? Those are always issues that can come up that can slow things down as the different sides fight it out. I just think, given the track record of Congress the last 15, 20 years, they don't deliver their appropriations bills, all of their appropriations bills, by September 30th. That just tends to be a deadline they blow past. The question is how many political grenades are going to be thrown into the mix that will slow things down even more. So I would like to be optimistic, but really I'm kind of planning part of my between Thanksgiving and Christmas this year of hanging out in the Capitol waiting for them to do some spending bills.
Yeah. Yes, I'm sure you'll have a lot of folks hanging out with you, watching that sort of thing happen. What about infrastructure? What kind of response was there this go around, talking about infrastructure?
Well, I think there's some optimism. There was some initial agreement of President Trump and the Senator Schumer and Speaker Pelosi on a $2 trillion infrastructure plan. I'm sorry, plan is not the right word. It's more sort of like a concept. There are no specifics. There's not legislative text. There's just sort of the general agreement that on things that should be addressed. So it will be interesting to see if they're able to hang together an agreement as you start getting into the nitty-gritty sort of details of what are your priorities for infrastructure. We have roads, bridges, dams and locks and other things that are important, but how are you going to kind of divvy up those priorities and what sort of how are you going to, what's going to go first, and whether you're going to be able to get enough bipartisan support, because there are some Republicans as well as some, I think, some conservative Democrats who are concerned about the price tag. $2 trillion is a lot of money. How is it going to be paid? Are there going to be offsets, things within the budget that you say, all right, we'll just take that and we're going to apply that to covering part of the cost for this or covering part of the cost for that. So we still have a ways to go. So right now there's optimism. The devil's in the details, as they like to say.
All right, more to come with Ellen Ferguson on RFD today.
More farm news and information ahead. Stay tuned for more RFD Today here on the Illinois Farm Bureau Radio Network.
Farm Week and FarmWeekNow.com journalist Daniel Grant connects rural routes for you. With more than 2 decades of reporting under his belt, Dan is the go-to source for farmers when it comes to commodities. Here's a bit about his rural roots.
I grew up on a grain and livestock farm near Roseville in Warren County. What I love about my job is working with people, traveling across Illinois, and visiting farms along the way.
Be it routes or roots, RFD Radio, FarmWeekNow.com, and Farm Week keep you connected.
Attention corn farmers. Your corn checkoff dollars are working with the U.S. Meat Export Federation to grow red meat export volumes. Because when we're exporting beef, we're also exporting corn. The beef industry consumes 28% of all corn fed to livestock, plus additional corn in the form of DDGs, a co-product of ethanol production. Now that's what we call working an angle. Your checkoff is working corn from all angles. Because of the Illinois Corn Marketing Board, your profitability is our bottom line. A message from the Illinois Corn Checkoff.
Does the warmer weather have you itching for a weekend getaway? Take your Illinois Farm Bureau membership savings with you.
Farm Bureau members can save up to 20% at choice hotels, including favorites like Comfort Suites, Sleep Inn, Quality Inn and Suites, with even more to choose from.
Call 800-258-2847 or visit the Choice Hotels website to search all the hotels at once and to make advance reservations.
Contact your local county Farm Bureau for your discount code number.
Spring is here and things are buzzing. Farmers and pollinators are working together to help feed us. In fact, 1 out of every 3 bites of food we eat exists because of bees, butterflies, birds, bats, and other insects. Pollinators are important to our food system and the ecosystem overall. That's why farmers and those in the agricultural industry are working together to protect pollinators through education, research, and conservation efforts. Visit ILAGformonarchs.org to join the buzz. That's ILAGformonarchs.org.
All ag.
All Illinois.
All now.
There are a lot of smartphone apps out there, but do they have what's important to us here in Illinois? The Farm Week Now app does, and it's always at your fingertips. All ag, all Illinois, and 24/7 where and when you need it for free. Go to your app or Play Store on your smartphone, hit search, type in Farm Week Now, that's one word, and download it today. Brought to you by Illinois Farm Bureau, where we're all about farm, family, and food.
From midnight snacks
to holiday gatherings. Food is a part of our culture that brings us together every day. To make sure we all have food on our tables, Illinois farmers are going beyond planting crops and raising animals. We're making sure the wildlife that helps our food grow has homes too. To learn more about conservation efforts, visit ilfarmersconserve.com. Preserving our water, protecting our land, providing our food.
This message brought to you by Illinois Farm Bureau.
Ellen Ferguson in D.C., writing for Congressional Quarterly. We talked about a number of things. I want to get back to disaster assistance real quick because here we are in Illinois constantly watching river levels, especially the Mississippi and the Illinois rivers. And certainly, the Davenport was flooded last week, if I could put all my dates together, remembering those things. And so it's interesting that as well, when you talk about disaster relief, it's springtime. Who knows? There could be a couple tornadoes or something like that. I mean, the disasters, if they continue to arrive, then there are probably some people saying, "Hey, don't approve that yet," and we'd like to get a part of that as well. So that seems like an interesting thing to have to debate and determine.
Well, I think they will try and do as good a job as they can to incorporate the latest damage into whatever package they put together with, I think, a proviso that, yes, it's spring, there'll be tornadoes, there may be some other things coming up, and there may be a need to do additional disaster assistance down the road. So I don't think it would close the door to additional disaster assistance. I think the goal at this point is to try and at least deal with some of the damage that's been done. And once they have a better estimate on costs for things that have happened subsequently, then maybe to address that.
One of the things I find interesting, I've lost a little bit of interest in it since St. Louis area was not a finalist. This moving of agencies within U.S. Department of Agriculture, and I still think it's going to be somewhere around Purdue University. As if my opinion matters. But
why do you think that?
Mitch Daniels, being president of Purdue, who at one time was, he worked for President Bush, and plus the Vice President Pence being from Indiana, I feel like there's some sort of synergy in there that would make sense. But it seems interesting to me that an entire agency would leave D.C. and go elsewhere. Has this happened? Is this the first time for this sort of thing, or is this just something that happens every once in a while within a government agency?
Well, the Trump administration has, I think, emphasized the idea of moving agencies out of the Beltway. There are similar efforts in the Interior Department to move some agencies out. It's an expensive place Washington, D.C. is an expensive place to rent. But I think it's also part of the effort to decentralize government, and also kind of a little bit of PR there of, politicians, particularly Republican politicians, like to say that not all wisdom resides in D.C., and so we should go out and into communities and establish agencies, and that agencies can also act as a little bit of economic development depending on where they go. The push to move the Economic Research Service and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture is a little different. I think that it has encountered some resistance. There is support. There are some appropriators who have supported this, and they'll be having to provide some funding for moving it. But there's been, I think, a great deal of resistance among research groups and among former USDA administrators of the agencies, just asking, why is this necessary? Because these are agencies that produce information or fund research across the country. but they can do it from D.C., and they also help raise the profile of agricultural research. And, they act as sort of a hub for the kind of research that's important to agriculture, that's important for spotting trends. So I don't know exactly how this is going to play out. In some of the spending bills, the final spending bills, there were kind of like little warning shots to Secretary Perdue about being careful about moving ahead with this. There's still an outstanding request, I believe, from the House Agriculture Appropriations Subcommittee for a cost analysis. Tell us how much this is going to cost and what the benefits are going to be, and justify this to us. I mean, one interesting thing on the top 3 finalist list is that the Secretary talked a lot about moving agencies out and what kind of benefit they can be for rural economic development. And with the exception of Indiana, where a lot of the sites or however number of sites there are in Indiana are not been revealed or disclosed, there are no real rural areas in the top 3. You got the Research Triangle in North Carolina. You've got Purdue and the state of Indiana in undisclosed locations. And I'm blanking out on
Kansas City's the other one.
Third, Kansas City, Kansas, and Missouri. Those aren't small towns, and I don't know how much economic development those 2 agencies would bring to them, because we're talking at this point maybe a total of 400, 500, maybe 600 people. So again, it raises another question, and it'd be interesting to see what sort of additional questions lawmakers may have.
We'd be happy to put them in Peoria, but we'll see how that goes. Ellen, thanks so much. Good to visit with you. Hopefully we'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care.
Ellen Ferguson writes for Congressional Quarterly in D.C. We talk to her every month here on RFD Today. Stay with us.
RFD Radio Network's DeLoss Yankee connects rural routes for you. DeLoss delivers essential farm and food-related news to our listeners. His witty voice has been heard on the air for more than 2 decades. Here's a bit about his rural roots.
Growing up on a farm prepared me for my career. I try to know a little about a lot of things and let the people I interview be the experts. I've always wanted to be on the radio. I'm just happy to do what I enjoy.
Be it routes or roots, RFD Radio, FarmWeekNow.com, and Farm Week keep you connected.
Are you preparing for planting season? We don't mean to be a pest, but here's a few things you need to know before you grow. The Illinois Department of Agriculture now requires special local needs labels, including new restrictions for the use of herbicide dicamba on top of soybeans in Illinois for the 2019 growing season. Did you know these additional restrictions go beyond federally approved labels? Remember, the label is the law. To find out more about these Illinois-specific labels, visit ilfb.org/label-aware.
Let's check the markets on the RFD Radio Network. I'm DeLoss Yankee. Couple cents higher for corn and 4 to 5 cents higher for soybeans. Bit of a turnaround Tuesday that so far is holding. July corn up 2.5, 366 3/4. September up 2, 373 3/4. December up 1.5, 383 3/4. July soybeans up a nickel, 8.35 1/4. August up a nickel, 8.41 1/2. November up 4 cents, 8.57. July wheat up a fraction, 4.37 1/2. Livestock, June hogs down 2.22, 87.52. That after spending the entire day yesterday down the $3 limit. June cattle up 37, 112.65. Feeder cattle for August up 170, 146 and a nickel. Crude oil down $1.04. DeLoss Yankee, RFD Radio Network. Welcome back to RFD Today on a Tuesday. I'm DeLoss Yankee. We bring in Dr. Jim Minert over at Purdue University. Jim, how are you?
Good. How are you, DeLoss?
Doing well. I saw, our crop progress and condition rating, we had 10% of the corn crop planted in the state, which means And the 5-year average is 66. So instead of 2/3 and 2/3 of 11.2 million, that was the prospective planting number. So we're about 6.5 million acres shy right now. And then I saw Indiana had 3% planted of all things. So I assume pretty wet.
We were lucky for that to move up from 1%, as wet as it's been, as much rainfall as we've had, and the difficulty in getting in any fields. I wasn't sure we'd be up more than maybe just 1%, but we got 2% planted last week somehow.
Wow. So that's you're almost a couple million short going into mid-May. So thinking from an economist standpoint, these funds don't seem to care much about yields, especially as you get later in the planting season. I assume they're just counting acres at this point still, aren't they?
Well, acres, and I think there's just been so much focus on the demand side with respect to what's taken place in the international trade front. And admittedly, trade is much more important on the soybean side than it is on the corn side, but still, with respect to the trade disputes anyway. And I just think that's been the focus. And so there's also this idea that, if it does dry up, a lot of forecasts suggesting after mid-month we'll return to some more normal weather patterns. And if that's the case, we could get a lot of corn planted those last half of the month of May, in which case the yield impacts might not be that significant. But certainly as we push later and later and start looking at the prospect for more June corn to be planted, the worry wall is going to have to increase.
Yeah. Well, the reason we're talking is the latest announcement, latest readings of the Purdue CME Group Ag Economy Barometer, which took a dip based on your last survey results.
Yeah, I think dip probably understates it. I think on the headline we used the word plummet, and it really did drop sharply. I think the reading this month was 115. That's down from 133 a month earlier. And if you look at the history of the barometer going back to the fall of 2015, that's the fourth largest 1-month decline we've seen in the barometer. So people became quite a bit more negative about really two things. One was their current conditions. The current condition index fell, I think, 16 points compared to, I'm reading my numbers wrong here. Current conditions actually fell 21 points compared to a month earlier, and the future expectation index actually dropped 16 points. So those are both big declines in those indexes. So that tells you people were worried about the future, but they're also saying things are not very good right now, and it really deteriorated over the course of the winter. If you look at the readings, we were much more positive at the beginning of the year than we are now.
What time do you, or what part of the month do you do these surveys?
It's a mid-month survey, and we typically try to do it during, a Monday through Friday time frame. So, but roughly the middle of the month, so the time frame doesn't change very much at all from one month to the next.
I was curious because if in mid-April folks were worried about current and future outlooks, how much more so might they be when the next one rolls around if we're not in the fields yet?
Well, that's a good point. I think back in April, it was really the focus wasn't on the weather conditions so much as probably much more on prices, although there was some impact from the weather in that point in time, particularly for people that were a little farther west, being impacted by the flooding at that time, especially the Missouri River. But now, of course, the Mississippi has been and the Illinois rivers have been much more prominent with respect to flood impacts. But I think that's going to have an impact probably this month when we see those readings come out here in early June. But I think this one was really mostly about prices. We could see that at the end of each barometer survey, it's an open-ended question. So if you stick with us on the survey on the phone, we conclude with, what's on your mind. And the vast majority of people that complete the survey do have some comments to make at the end. And when we look at those results, we actually use that to generate a word cloud. You can tell as we moved from the end of last year, beginning of this year, into the April survey, people are much more worried about prices. They're looking at the bottom line. These are very weak prices for soybeans in particular, but also to some extent for corn. And they're doing the projections. As you move through the course of the winter, people sat down and did their budgets and did their projections. In many cases, those were a part of the loan renewal process. And 2019 doesn't look very pretty when you look at the prices. And if you assume that we're going to have something in the ballpark of normal yields. And when I say normal yields, I tend to start with whatever your crop insurance yields are. So if you look at the trend-adjusted crop insurance yield, which was substantially lower than what most people's yields were last year here in Illinois and Indiana, if you plug those in with these kind of prices, 2019 does not look like a very good year. It looks like a pretty ugly year on many farms across the Midwest. And so I think the survey is really reflecting that.
Well, we're talking on May 7. We haven't even started anything resembling a spring rally yet. And last year was Memorial Day when, shortly after that, when the China thing hit and the prices started to go down. So we've been almost a year through this and not a whole lot of hope on the horizon right now.
No, and I think, one of the questions we asked this month was we asked people, do you think it's likely that the trade dispute with China on soybeans in particular will be resolved by July 1? And people became much more negative on that this month than they were just a month earlier. A month ago, I think 55% of the people said it was unlikely that we would settle it by July 1. This month, 72% said it's unlikely. And I think that's feeding into it, too. People are losing some confidence in the ability to resolve this trade dispute in time to have an impact on the marketing of the 2019 crop and of course, any leftovers from the 2018 crop. And there was an expectation on the part of a lot of people. You mentioned the spring rally. In the data, we typically see that spring rally the last half of the month of May, on soybeans maybe spilling over into the first week or two of June. But in corn, typically the last half of the month of May is that spring rally. I think there was an expectation on a lot of people's parts that not only would we see a kind of a normal spring rally, but also see the trade dispute resolved, and maybe that would give us an additional bump, and that's looking less and less likely. And, of course, as this trade dispute carries on into late spring and possibly into the early summer, if that happens, that's going to impact how we market that 2019 crop. If you look at the history of soybean exports to China, the vast majority of those take place in the fall when the South American producers are essentially out of the market. And if we don't resolve this relatively soon and in time to really have an impact on those fall marketings, it makes 2019 look even tougher.
Yeah. 74% stated it was a bad time to make large farm investments. It's one thing to say, it's another thing to say bad time. That's a significant number, it looks like.
Yeah, well, it is, and I guess I want to maybe step that back just a little because we never seem to have, in the life of the survey so far, going back to 2015, we never get a majority of people saying that now's a good time. Because, so I want to scale that back just a little. But we do compute the large farm investment index, and I think what was probably significant there was this was one of the lowest readings we've had in that large farm investment index. I think the lowest reading we've ever had in that index is 42, and that was last fall. This one was at 48, and I think there's only been 4 or 5 times since the survey started in 15 when we've seen the index drop below 50. Yes. So people were more wanted to hold back on those investments and less positive about that than they've been for quite some time.
Jim Minard, stay tuned. This is RFD Today. Let's check livestock markets on the RFD Radio Network. I'm DeLoss Yankee. Illinois direct hog market is steady to weak on Monday, $51 to $57 a hundredweight. Sow market was $1 lower, $54 to $68 for lightweights, $60 to $74 for heavyweights. Heavy boars with a top of 15. Weekly crop condition report from Ag Statistics showed an improvement in pasture conditions throughout the state, 17% excellent, 46% good. 29% fair, 8% rated either poor or very poor. The numbers are fairly similar to last year at this time. Illinois Beef Association, with May being Beef Month, is celebrating through its Best Burger competition. You can find it on the Facebook page. Illinois Best Burger Contest officially started last Wednesday. DeLoss Yankee, RFD Radio Network.
How do people benefit from raising livestock here in Illinois? Rich Giebert, Illinois farmer, president of the Illinois Farm Bureau.
Well, growing up on a livestock farm was always interesting, and I enjoy it more today than I did back then. But it did give me the opportunity to have a good work ethic, learn to get up in the morning, And you know, that was difficult during my senior days at high school and college days. I had a tendency not to go to bed at a respectable hour. But no, it was always enjoyable on the farm and getting up before daybreak and milking the cows and getting the chores done and then go about the rest of the day's business.
Illinois Farm Bureau, along with beef, corn, milk, pork, and soybean associations, make up the Livestock Development Group, supporting the Illinois livestock sector. For more information, check out illinoislivestock.org.
Welcome back to RFD Today on a Tuesday. I'm DeLoss Yankee. I always mention the website when we talk about the ag barometer, purdue.ag/ag barometer, purdue.ag/ag barometer. You can go back to a 2 or 4 year ag school in Illinois. And boy, that U of I Research Park would have been a great place also for the Economic Research Service for all those folks coming out of D.C., but apparently that did not get very much of a look either. Okay, Bryce Anderson is on the phone, DTN's ag meteorologist. Bryce, how are you, sir?
DeLoss, I'm doing fine. I'd like to have a little bit more sunshine to look at this morning in Omaha, whereas Sunday it turned out that way before a quick storm hit, but we'll have a few more go-rounds of cloudiness before things kind of start shaping up here the way things are looking. But otherwise, it's a nice Tuesday out here.
Yeah, so today, tomorrow, and Thursday, how widespread and how much more? You know, you see a 1.5 inch enough times, that eventually can add to 2 more inches of rainfall over the next few days.
Well, it certainly does, and that is a real issue right now with very wet soils and terrific flooding in river valleys of the Midwest and historic flooding in parts of the mid-Mississippi Valley. We know that. So that's going to still be with us, this periodic round of showers and thunderstorms with us through another couple days. Now, fortunately, this pattern that we have been laboring under for quite some time with a large round of cold air troughing out over the Canadian prairies, and then another active trough off the west coast, keeping things on a very unsettled situation for us, and then this powerful ridge that's led to hot conditions in the southeast. That whole setup is going to change over the next week to 10 days, where we have more troughing over the eastern United States and west to the Mississippi Valley, and then ridging developing over the northern Rockies and the Canadian prairies. So that should finally dry things out for us and allow temperatures to maybe still be on the cool side, but at least showing a little bit more of a seasonal tendency, and it should improve things for being able to get a little bit more field work done, and we certainly could use that.
Well, yeah, because we just need something to hang our hat on at this point. Especially given what we're seeing temperature-wise, and was it just last week that Rapid City, South Dakota had 8 inches of snow? I mean, do you feel like we're out of the woods yet for anything, any kind of final frost date, anything that could sneak up on us anywhere in the state or anywhere in the Midwest for that matter?
Well, I think the central and eastern Midwest is pretty much out of the frost threat for this season, for the spring. Now, in the northern plains and north of Interstate 90 that goes across south central Minnesota, I think that they're still, kind of in a possible area to get some frost before this week is over with, especially the next 3 days or so. But after that, we are looking for the seasonal trend to finally start acting more spring-like, and that should kind of remove that part of things from the equation. And along with that, that's also going to help to relax this terrific temperature contrast that we've had that has driven the development of these big rain systems that we've had to put up with. And so that is going to be a benefit on a number of different angles for us.
All right. So significant temperature increases? Are we fairly normal with temperature, or where do you see us over that stretch?
Yeah, I think the trend is going to be more seasonal for us. I don't think we're going to have a real big spike in our temperatures during the next week or so, except for possibly, in parts of the southeast, the Ohio Valley through the southeast during the next 3 or 4 days. But after that, the trend is going to be more seasonal, kind of across quite a bit of the Midwest. And again, the presence of that ridging in terms of upper level high pressure over the northern Rockies is going to truly allow for a little bit less of a stormy track to develop, and then with the relaxation of the southeastern U.S. high pressure, we're going to finally close down the Gulf of Mexico from sending so much moisture into the Midwest. That's also been a big factor in the kind of rainfall that we've had to put up with.
And when does all that? Does that start later this week then?
It's going to start later this week, and then the way the models are showing things, it looks like that trend is going to be in place during most of next week. Now, I know that there's going to be some days when we're simply going to have to wait for fields to dry, but it should allow for a little bit more progress, and I think we're still on an uneven overall tendency in field work, but when things do start improving, I know that producers are already in place to take care of any field work chance that they get.
Wow. I mean, this is the first kind of hopeful message I've heard in quite some time, so don't be teasing about this, Bryce.
Well, I'm not, and believe me, I've looked at the charts closely and double checked, in fact, before making that kind of a pronouncement or before making that kind of an assessment.
Yeah.
But it does certainly look more promising. We have seen this type of development over the last 3 days, looking out to the 10-day period. And so it does certainly appear that is going to be the big